welcome. It is so good to see you. I'm delighted that you chose to join us this evening, whether you're joining us on Zoom now or you're watching this live streamed on the website, either now or later. You are welcome, and we are glad that you're here. And I am Pastor Mark Perry, pronouns he and his, and I'm the pastor here at Sierra Evangelical Lutheran Church. And I'm very pleased that we have this opportunity to learn and share together this evening. These presentations flow out of a larger series of events that are part of the season of creation here at Sierra Lutheran Church, but also around the world. The season of creation is time that was established in the 80s between the Roman Catholic Pope as well as the Orthodox Patriarch, and it also involves Protestant denominations. And the emphasis this year is on Jubilee from Leviticus 25. And it goes from September 1st to October 4th every year. And so it was also prompted by the interest that was expressed by our book study that we had on this wonderful and challenging book called Climate Church, Climate World by Reverend Jim Antal. And many of you here have been in that book study. So welcome back, and thank you for your encouragement to do this evening. And the presentations now and the next 2 weeks are made possible really only because of the gracious and generous sharing of time and effort by Dr. Greg Garfin, who is with us this evening. He's the University of Arizona Associate Professor and Associate Extension Specialist, School of Natural Resources and Environment, Deputy Director for Science Translation Outreach, Arizona Institutes for Resilience, and University Director of the Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center. And if he wants to add anything to that, he can do that. But he's really the one that we connected with through our member, Christy Brown, who also connected with him in other presentations and times. And he's gonna be bringing colleagues together the next 2 weeks. And then tonight, he'll be the one who is gonna be offering his expertise in our question and answer period. Before we go any further, since we have, I think a number of people, not too many people that I think this might be too burdensome, but I think it's an intimate enough group. I would at least like to do this. And if you don't wish to participate in this part, just say pass. But I wanted to invite, if folks could, and I'll just kind of call you out by your name that you have on your screen, your first name. And if you wish to share, fine. If you would, maybe share what your name is, what your role or title, if you have one, is, and what prompts you to be a part of this tonight? What prompts you to be here with us? So does that sound okay to folks? And again, if you're not comfortable, you just want to pass on that, just say pass. That's fine. But so I'd like to just kind of a way for us to get acquainted and know where we're coming from a bit, and be helpful to us as well to know a little bit about you. So let's start with maybe the shyest person in the group, which is the Hamps.
Yeah, that's us. Anyway, this is Doug and Gail, and we're originally from Michigan, and we just saw that climate change caused the fires in the western states, and it's moving toward Michigan. That smoke is going to get there. It's bizarre. So ain't no planet B, and we want to find out what we can do to save this one.
All right, thank you. Linda Radwick?
I'm new to climate change, although we've traveled a lot, and we've seen things like in Alaska where the icebergs are dropping off. And in fact, that was just on the news today, I think in Greenland. But anyway, I want to learn more. And so that's why I'm here.
Thank you. And one of the things I just want to point out that I really appreciate, because I'm looking straight at it right now from where I'm seated. Linda Radwick is the leader of our altar guild, our church, and the little area behind our altar is filled with all these beautiful plants. As instead of, we usually have flowers back there that have dedications to people in worship service, but she put that back there for our season of creation, and it's wonderful. All right, how about Jean?
Okay, I'm Jean Festa. I'm a retired pastor at Sierra Vista United Methodist Church, and I have a group of, well, there's 15 people on our mailing list who are interested in creation care. And so Christy Brown invited me to come, and I'm so glad she did. And this is?
I'm Carl Kaus. I'm the music director at the United Methodist Church after I thought I retired, but many things changed over the last year for me. So, and I've lived in this area in Arizona since 1958.
Oops, it froze up there. Let's see if it comes back. I hope we don't have too much of that happening. All right, we'll come back to Jean and Carl. Becky?
Hi, I'm Becky. I grew up in the Midwest on a farm, and even in the time growing up there, we noticed a change, like in the scarcity of certain birds, like the meadowlarks from growing up. And in the past, I've been an avid hiker, and Glacier National Park has been one of my favorite. And last year I went to Iceberg Lake. There are no more icebergs on Iceberg Lake. And I've seen a big change on how the glaciers there have melted over the years from my past hikes. And I'm here because I'm concerned with the climate, the earth, and to find out what I can do or what we can do.
Thank you. Is it Jane? I'm not sure if I pronounced it right.
Yeah, Jane, or nickname Jania.
Jane.
And just off the camera is Carol Geyer. And we attend the Methodist Church. And I have been, I guess I've been interested in the environment all my life, starting with my parents taking us on camping trips.
Same here.
Very good.
Wait, I have to ask, Mr. Hemp, did you teach at Buena?
Oh my goodness, yes I did.
I know you. I'm the youngest Glowacki.
Well, that's entirely forgivable.
Okay.
Anything more you want to add? You don't have to. But again,
No.
for those that popped in, we're just introducing ourselves, name, anything about your title or role you might want to share, and what prompts you to be here. But if you don't wish to share, just say pass, and that's perfectly acceptable. How about Dan Jermaine?
Yeah, actually, Penny is here, but she's off camera.
Okay,
But,
that's fine.
Yeah, we're retired. We've lived here since 2004, and we travel a lot and like to camp. We are with an RV, but still, we've been many national parks and things like that, and they talk about how the change has been happening, and ice fields disappearing and glaciers disappearing, and when you hear the news and stuff and how people try to deny anything's going on, it just really, I don't know, makes me upset. I feel like we got to be thinking about this and thinking about our future and our children's future and our grandchildren's future. We got to do something. It's time to start doing it. So, way beyond time.
Okay,
Well, we used to live in Washington State, and the Olympic National Park used to have glaciers.
Yeah.
Not so much anymore. And we backpacked down into the Grand Canyon, and we've done things like that over the decades. And it's changed so much. And hardly recognize a lot of places we've been, and so that's an important issue for us. We've traveled the country and seen 90 million acres of corn being grown. But but as far as the ecology of the situation is it's important. We have to be able to be sustaining.
All right, thank you. How about Donna? Do you want to share anything? I don't see anything there, but your name is there. Maybe not. Okay, Tricia?
Hi, Tricia Girardet. I've
You want to pull up a chair?
been an activist on various environmental issues for around here for 25 years. And I'm here because of Greg Garfin. He is such a great speaker. So.
Great, thank you. And thank you for your work, all your work. Your name is often dropped in lots of places in a positive way. Jim?
You're talking about me?
Yes, sir.
Hi. We had a friend who's since passed away, but he was superintendent at Glacier Park, and we had occasion to travel through there. In fact, when Darlene and I were married, we drove back from the Pacific Northwest across and went through Glacier Park on the way back to South Dakota. And of course, at that time, the glaciers came clear down to the top of that lake. That's very, I don't remember the name of the lake, but anyway, it was there. And now when we were to visit our friend a couple of years ago at Glacier Park, none of those glaciers are even close to the lake anymore. There's still ice kind of way up high on the mountain, but our friend told us that in his prediction, with only a few more years and there would be no glaciers in Glacier Park. Now, how's that? So I'm just wanting to know what I can do, if there is anything I can do to make a change in that.
Thank you. So again, we're inviting folks to just share name, if you have a role you want to share that you're in, or and then just what prompts you to be here. So I'm looking at Glenn, if you want to say or anything or write anything in the chat.
Hi, Glenn Manuth. I'm an instructor in the Center for Lifelong Learning at Cochise College, where I at times teach things about weather and climate. And I'm also the vice president of the Southeast Arizona chapter of the American Meteorological Association in Tucson. That's where we're based. So we're always looking for new members, and I'm looking for speakers too. So on board with you tonight. And the last time I was in Glacier National Park, I lasted about 60 seconds in Iceberg Lake before the pain was too great. It's been cold.
Well, it's still cold. I didn't say it wasn't cold.
Thank you. Dorothy, or you like to be called Dottie?
Yes. Hi. I'm a seminarian from St. Stephen's Episcopal Church here in town. First, I must congratulate you on the lovely pictures of the families where they usually sit on your pews. I just think that's a wonderful idea. My husband and I moved out here from New Jersey in 1995, and we just fell in love with the whole desert and the whole state that we had seen in a couple of years before he passed away. And I've seen more of it since then over the years. But what struck me and breaks my heart is to look out across the desert, and even in neighborhoods, there are plastic bags caught on trees and bushes everywhere you go. And it just annoys me that now that people had started to use their cloth bags for groceries, and then because of COVID, they had to go back to telling us to use the plastic bags. So now they're multiplying out there again. And so that's another thing. I had heard a presentation at a Deacon conference a few weeks ago. And I think one of your speakers tonight is also was one of the ones that we heard that night. And it has piqued the interest in me. So I need to learn more so that I can get something going perhaps in our church community.
Very good. Thank you. Stephanie, you want to share anything?
Sure. My name is Stephanie Bobar. I grew up in Sierra Vista. I live in Tempe now, and I participated in the book group, but just looking for ways to make a difference and not be overwhelmed. And this group has come up with some fantastic ideas, and I'm looking forward to participating, albeit from Tempe, as we explore this further and look for ways to make a difference.
Thank you so much. Sandy?
Sandy Hall, I'm a member of the SELC, and I'm just looking for, again, ways to help improve the environment.
And she and Christy are, as well as others, have been champions in helping to improve the environment of our church through landscaping, through Xeriscape and water collection and all kinds of things like that. We just had a meeting on Sunday. So thank you. We look forward to what that's going to look like for us and how that's going to
Me too.
bless not only our church, but the community. Carl and Leslie, anything you want to share?
We are distressed by how we keep on treating finite sources as if they're infinite resources, and not just, and we're distressed by the environmental rollbacks that we've seen that protect around us. And I'm also distressed by, it's not bad enough we're doing it on Earth, but now we're looking at space too, at mining and the space debris that's out there, and it just seems like somewhere it's got to stop.
Okay, thank you. Carl, anything you want to add?
No, that was about my sentiments exactly.
All right. Good to have a spokesperson in your wife, right?
Yes.
She never shuts up.
Carl has such a hard time sharing himself, what he says. So, yeah. Kidding. All right. This beautiful young woman there, Linda, is my wife. And so do you want to offer or share anything, dear?
Sure. Share a love and passion for creation and the environment as with my husband, and as a director of faith formation at Sierra Lutheran. I think this is a huge part of kind of a component I think we don't talk about enough in church, about creation and how God moves through creation and speaks to us. And so just really concerned about what's happening to the world. And it's, as Doug said, we don't have a planet B that we're aware of, so or that we can get to right now. So anything I can learn more about, and also especially with the youth that I work with, they have a lot of concern about it. And so I would love more information that I can share with them to encourage them and see what we can also do physically as a church with the youth to help care for our environment right around us and beyond.
Thank you. Leonora, would you like to share anything?
Yes, I'm a member of the United Methodist Church and the Earth Keepers group that Pastor Jean has formed. And I think I've been involved in recycling all my life, thanks to my mother, who washed plastic Ziploc bags and that sort of thing. We always did whatever we could to recycle and reuse. So I'm just interested in hearing the speakers.
Very good. Thank you. Kaylin, you want to share anything?
I'll pass.
That's fine. Is it Anthony or Tony?
I'll pass.
Very good. Thank you. Larry, you want to share anything? No. Okay, he's running the AV. Larry Ruiz there. There he is, masked up. He's not sure who can work with the laptop there. Can you hear?
Oh, that's who it is. Okay.
Can you all hear him or not?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And it's compulsory on here. Amanda, go ahead and speak. Don't be here. Friday AV, so I'm here. I'm the president of the SELC, your congregation council, and breaking my heart for my 6-year-old grandson growing up in a world where people
Can't hear him.
Can't hear him. Yeah.
All right. Sorry.
I'm just hearing the echo sound from the sanctuary.
Oh, okay. Well, just to convey, he was just, yeah, he shares his love, and he and his wife, Kim, have taken on the big heart task of caring for their grandson, who's 6, and that he's not going to grow up in a world the same way that we grew up in a world. And so, anything more you want to add to that? So that's so promising. I'm not sure thank you. I'm not sure if Ro is there or not. Ro, are you there? I see your name, but I haven't heard anything from her. Okay, not hearing anything. Donna, do you want to share anything? Not hearing anything there. And then there's a phone, and so there's no name with that. Whoever that is, would you like, is there any on that phone? Would you like to share anything?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Brandon Lloyd. Just interested to learn about any recent science, especially anything related to the local area, to understand science and climate change.
Very good. Thank you so much. And so I really appreciate you all sharing. I think everybody got a chance, right, to say something if they want to. I know it took time, and especially for those who are watching live stream, I appreciate your patience with this since you can't participate in this same kind of way. But one of the things that I think is helpful is that we, in this whole endeavor, do talk to each other about this and about things that are important to us. This is something that our speaker that we're going to be hearing in just a moment, Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, really emphasizes that we do need to talk to people. That the statistics are that she'll lift up is that the vast majority of people in the United States are concerned about this issue, but then when it asks them about whether they've talked to people about it, they say no. And so hearing the stories that we have, hopefully you've made some connections with your own story or learned something new or found something of interest, and hopefully that's a way that kind of helps us to encourage us in this conversation. Plus, it's always, I think, good to know who's a part of these things and we get acquainted to that. Greg, would you like to introduce or say anything about yourself?
Sure. I'm Greg Garfin. I'm a climatologist at the University of Arizona. I was trained initially in climatology and then paleoclimatology. So I'm a graduate of the University of Arizona's Laboratory of Tree Ring Research. I spent a little time, a little more than 20 years ago, reconstructing past climates. And for most of the last 20 years, the kind of work that I've done has been highly engaged with various kinds of decision makers, primarily natural resource managers who need climate information to make decisions. So I've worked with fire managers and water managers, urban planners, public health officials, and others. And it's nice to be able to get away from your computer and spend time with people to actively inform issues or solve problems together. And I'll give you just a tiny bit of personal information, which is that I'm Jewish, and this Friday evening begins Rosh Hashanah, literally the head of the year. Some people interpret that as the anniversary of creation. So I feel very honored to be part of this group and taking part in this series during this season of creation. Thank you very much, Pastor Mark, for inviting me to join in with your congregation and other congregations in the area.
You're welcome. And again, thank you so much for being here. We look forward to hearing much more from you and your colleagues later as well. As we continue forward, just a couple of the logistical realities of Zoom. to be aware of. Again, I know a lot of you already know these things, but in case you don't, you're new to this, just some things that could be helpful. And so first of all, we're going to use in the rest of it, especially when Greg is talking, the speaker format. Right now, you can make your own too. On the top right of your Zoom, there's a little box that can say speaker view or gallery view. And so if we're in the gallery view as far as I'm looking at right now, and when I go to speaker view, then you only see my face, at least for most of you. And so we'll do that when we have this presentations by the speakers. So just to note that. And second, if you have a question or comment to offer, you can, there's on the bottom of the screen, if you're using your computer, it's not so obvious if you're using a phone, but there's a place on the bottom right, little icon called reactions. And if you click on that, you'll see there's one to raise your hand and one if you want to applaud, to show you really like something that was said or that you saw. So if you have a question, especially if we're in this, it's going to be harder to see everybody at once. So to raise your hand with that little icon could be helpful if and when you have a question for that as well, just to note that little thing as well. And third, I encourage you to mute yourself if you're not speaking, so that helps to diminish any background noises. And in fact, when I present the video in just a moment of Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, I will be muting everybody at that point. So you'll hear only the video and there won't be any eruptions from other things, you know, like dogs barking and dishes breaking or something like that. And then if you then have a question or comment, like someone mentioned before, you don't have to unmute yourself on the bottom left. You could just press the space bar and then you can talk you hold the space bar and people will hear you as you hold that space bar if you want to then make it a little more convenient if you're muted already. So those things as well. And if you do type in the chat, there's a chat. If you do type something in, as Trisha has done, thank you, Trisha. And she's written some information that could be helpful to everybody. So make sure you take note of that as well. But to note that if you do send it to everybody, that means it goes to everybody. Putting those on live stream, but not just on Zoom. So it goes out to the whole world at that point. If you write something to me personally, I think anyway, I'll only see it as well. Those of you who have my phone, you're welcome to text me as well. So all that boring stuff, but just so you're kind of on board so that we can carry on this conversation in as helpful way as possible on Zoom. So the first thing that we're going to be sharing is actually a recorded video, and it's about 37 minutes that we're going to be seeing, and it presents Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, and it's about the global reality impact of climate change and the hope that we can have with that as well. And she's the director of climate science at Texas Tech and a lead author of the National Climate Assessment. And she's been called by the United Nations the champion of the earth. And she is a much sought after speaker. In fact, we tried to get her, I should say, Dr. Garfin, Greg tried to get her to be here if she could, but she was already double booked, so that didn't work for us. But we thought it was so excellent, and it really presents it in a succinct and helpful way that I wanted to show that. And she's also what's called an evangelical Christian married to a pastor, so she brings in that kind of faith background as well, which can be helpful to a lot of folks who are watching this at this time. And this presentation we're going to see is the third in a 6-session series presented by the Evangelical Environmental Network. And you'll hear in there then, because it was a webinar, she's going to be inviting people to give input on various things through the software that she had. So she might do that, but of course we can't do that because it's recorded, previously recorded. So we'll just save our questions and answers. And you can write in the chats if you want to Greg or jot them down for yourself so you make sure that it gets asked afterwards. And if we run out of time, we're going till 8:30. If we're trying to do these sessions in 90 minutes, if you run out of time, we can also keep those questions for the next time as well. So those things. And so before I continue on with a brief prayer invocation, are there any further questions or things that people want to comment on or lift up? All right, seeing none, then let me offer a brief prayer and we will bring on board Dr. Hayhoe. Please pray with me if you are a praying person. If not, let it be a meditation time for you. Loving Creator, we thank you for this awesome world and universe in which you have placed us. We thank you that in our tradition, we are called made in your image. And in that image, Lord, we thank you for the privilege of being caretakers of this cherished, precious gift that you've given us. We pray, Lord, that this time together would strengthen us in understanding how we can better care for that gift and care for ourselves and each other. And we pray your blessing on Greg and our presenters who will be a part of this, that they can present from what especially you want us to all to hear, and that from this we can hear what you want us to and do with it what you want us to do. We pray, Lord, your blessing on all those who are not only on Zoom, but out there watching either now or at another time. And we pray, Lord, that we can more and more understand and appreciate the wonderful community that we are a part of in this way and in the amazing interconnectedness of all your creation. We pray that all in your loving and powerful name. Amen. All right. So I'm going to mute you all. It's not because I don't want to hear from you, but just again, so that we're not having any distractions during the video. And it'll take me a minute to pull up the screen share. And if anybody can't hear it, be sure to to send a chat or let me know, but our AV people should also be able to help with that. So here we go. I'm also going to minimize all the other folks that are on right now.
Today, I'm going to talk about 4 questions. And the only reason we have to ask these questions today is not because the science is not certain. In fact, we've known the answer to many of these questions for a long time. It's because climate change is the most politically polarized issue in the entire United States. It is the issue on which people are most divided depending on their political ideology. And the fact that the answers that we have to these questions tend to depend not on how educated we are or how much science we know. They depend simply on where we fall on the political spectrum. But does God's creation give us a different answer depending on how we vote? Of course not. We as Christians believe in objective truth. And so what I'm going to do today is I want to unpack the answers to these 4 questions. Is climate changing? Are humans responsible? Why does it matter? And what can we do about it? Looking at what is actually happening in this world. So now I'm going to ask you another question. Ready? And this one you just have to pick a letter. This question is, which of these 4 questions that we're going to talk about today do you feel least able to answer? Question number 1, is climate changing? Enter A. B, are humans responsible? C, why does it matter? D, what can you do about it? E, all of these questions and a few more. And then F, none of these questions. I'm ready to give the webinar myself. I am delighted to see that we have a lot of people answering F, and that is great. I'm not sure why you're here, maybe just to get a few extra tips, but it's excellent that you already feel equipped to go out and tell people the answers to these questions. It looks like the second place is what can you do about it? And then we have why does it matter? And a few people wondering why is climate changing and are humans responsible? All right, I'm going to try to answer all of these questions for you. And for those of you who feel like you already know the answers, hopefully you'll pick up a few things and a few thoughts that you might not have used before. Here we go. Question number 1, is climate changing? Here's the thing. Every time we have a heat wave, people say, oh, it must be global warming. And then every time we have a cold wave, I don't know if you remember back in May, but it snowed in a lot of places in the Northeast and Southern Ontario back in May. Every time we have a cold wave, people say, hey, where's global warming now? The problem is that we don't often understand the difference between climate and weather. Weather is what happens in a certain place at a certain time. A heat wave, a cold wave, a flood, a storm, a drought. It's like a single tree. Climate, on the other hand, is like a whole forest of trees. It's the long-term average of weather over at least 20 to 30 years. So when we say, is climate changing, we can't just look to a single event to make a decision on whether it is or not. We have to understand that with weather, we can have hot and cold and wet and dry. But climate is the long-term average of that weather over at least 20 to 30 years, and it's the statistics of that weather. It's how frequently we have a heat wave, how long that heat wave is, how intense that heat wave is. Those statistics are climate. So the questions that we need to ask are this. First of all, is our long-term average changing? Is it going up or down? And then second, are the statistics of our weather extremes changing? Not did we have a heat wave, but in general, over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, are heat waves getting more frequent or stronger or more intense? And what's happening to other types of changes too? The answer to both of these questions in most cases is yes, but I'm going to walk you through a few of those. Here we go. Now, the National Climate Assessment that Jessica referred to is a fantastic resource for this information. If you want to take a screenshot of this, you can go ahead or a picture with your phone or just write down that web address. It's a very long document, but you don't have to read it like a novel. There's no plot to it. You just go and you find the chapter that you're interested in for the region you live in, and that's what you read. I'm going to give you a couple of highlights from this document, though. First of all, we know that global temperature is increasing. From year to year, it might go up and down. That's weather. But decade by decade by decade, it is steadily ticking upwards. That is climate. We know not only that thermometers are telling us this, but all kinds of indicators in God's creation, whether it's retreating glaciers, melting sea ice, the date on which our plants and trees are blooming earlier in the year, the fact that invasive species like ticks are moving northward as our winters get warmer. If we look in God's creation, we see a total of 26,500 independent lines of evidence, not thermometers, not satellites, not scientific observations, but evidence that we can see with our own eyes that yes, the planet is getting warmer. We know that it's getting warmer in the United States, and it's getting much warmer in certain places and in the winter. It's interesting, in the South, it's actually getting more humid. So if you just look at temperature as opposed to heat index, you don't see the whole picture. We know that wherever we live, we are vulnerable to very expensive weather and climate disasters. And if we live in Texas, we get more of these than any other state in the United States. And we know that this is just part of life on this planet. We can always roll a double six on our dice. That's our extreme events. But as climate changes, it's like it's sneaking in and taking one of those numbers and changing one of those numbers into another 6, and then another 6, and then even a 7. So all of a sudden, we're rolling more and more frequent extreme events in some cases because of a changing climate. Like what? Well, first of all, we know that when the air's warmer, it holds more water vapor. So when a storm comes along, as it always does naturally, there's more water vapor for that storm to sweep up and dump on us today than there was 50 or 100 years ago. So what happens is we're seeing more frequent heavy rainfall in a warmer world. The biggest increases have been in the Northeast and the Midwest, but we see them across most of the country. That is one of the ways that climate change is loading the weather dice against us. Extreme precipitation isn't just about the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere. Certain types of storms are also getting stronger, specifically atmospheric rivers and hurricanes, which they call typhoons or cyclones, depending on where else you live in the world. If you live along the coasts, you know about these storms. Atmospheric rivers hit the west coast of North America and dump huge amounts of rain. If you live along the Gulf Coast or the Atlantic coast, you know what a hurricane looks like. They dump a lot of rain too. Well, these storms are powered by warm ocean waters, and the oceans are getting a lot warmer. In fact, jumping ahead a little bit, over 90% of the extra heat that's being trapped inside the climate system by the blanket we're wrapping around our planet, made up of heat-trapping gases, over 90% of that heat is going into the ocean, not the atmosphere. That's a lot of heat to power stronger storms. And so we're seeing that not only do these storms have more rainfall associated with them, which of course is because the air holds more water vapor, but because they're powered by warmer oceans, they are intensifying faster. We don't see the overall number changing, but of the storms we get, more of them are stronger. They're moving more slowly, they're bigger, they're extending further northward, stronger. And we've got sea level rising too. What else is happening? Well, as you might expect, heat waves are becoming more frequent and cold waves are becoming less frequent. We know that cold temperature records are still being broken today by the handful, but we're breaking many times more heat records than cold records. And we know that we are seeing heat waves that are a lot more frequent than we should expect. For example, last summer, Europe suffered yet another extreme heat wave. And it turns out that they have had 500-year heat waves in 15 years. Talk about the dice being loaded against you. You aren't supposed to throw one of those heat waves more than once in 500 years on average. And they had 5 of them in 15 years. That's what I mean by climate change loading the dice against us. We also know that wildfires are not getting more frequent, especially in the US, where they're mostly just due to human ignition, people. But when they come, they're burning greater and greater area. If you think back, it's hard to think back to disasters that happened over 2 years ago, since we're in the middle of a huge unfolding disaster today. But if you cast your mind back to December 2017, that was when the Thomas Fire broke the record for the largest wildfire in California in recorded history. But that record was broken in August 2018, so 8 months later, by the Ranch Fire, and it was smashed in November 2018 by the Camp Fire. And the fires continue today in November. Just this past November, there was another string of horrific wildfires in California. Last year, Alaska had its most expensive wildfire season on record. In Canada, wildfires are causing more and more damage, burning greater and greater area. And I know it's hard to remember, but just in January this year in January, the headlines were full of what? They were full of the incredible wildfires in Australia that were absolutely devastating. It's estimated 1 billion animals were killed. And countless people lost their homes, had their lungs damaged from smoke inhalation, and even died as a result of these wildfires. When we see these extremes happening, the question is not, did climate change cause this event? As if it's just black and white, like, yes, this one was climate change, and no, that one wasn't. No, the question is, did climate change make it worse? That's the question. And this is a topic that's at the forefront of climate science today. It's called extreme event attribution. In other words, how much more frequent did climate change make this event, or how much stronger did it make it, or how much longer or how much more damaging did it make it? And there's an organization, there's an organization called the World Weather Attribution that goes through all of these different events and talks about them. And there's a really good book coming out called Angry Weather. I thought I had it on the next slide, but I forgot I didn't. Angry Weather is a fantastic book that actually explains how scientists do this. It's coming out in September, but you can pre-order it today, and it's very easy to read. So Angry Weather explains the science of attribution, but let me show you a few of the results that we've gotten when we've looked at these. So for example, I was talking about wildfires in California and Australia and Alaska. We know that wildfires are a natural part of the system, right? Wildfires are natural. But we know that with a changing climate, making hotter and drier conditions, we're getting more area burned by wildfires. So without wildfires, for example, in the Western United States, without climate change in the Western United States, we would have seen about 11 or 12 million acres burned since the 1980s by wildfires, naturally. But with climate change loading the dice against us, we have seen double that. With Hurricane Harvey, we know that climate change supercharged it. It increased the amount of rainfall associated with the storm by anywhere from 15 to possibly up to 40%. And the economic damages associated with the storm were significantly larger. It's estimated that could be as much as 3/4 of the damages could be due to human-induced climate change. We already saw how the European heat wave was made much more frequent because of climate change. And I love these words from the Prime Minister of Dominica because they're so, I don't love them because of the content. It's horrific. His island was absolutely decimated by the hurricane season. But these succinctly summarize why climate change matters to us, because to deny climate change today is to deny a truth that people have lived. So now on to question number 2. Okay, we see things changing all around the world. We see 26,500 indicators of a changing climate. We have personally experienced how things are just getting weirder in the places where we live. But how do we know that humans are responsible? Because climate has changed in the past, right? Of course it has. In fact, that's what we climate scientists study. And paleoclimate scientists like Jessica specifically study natural variability in the past. We are the ones who know that it's been warmer before and colder before, and why. So when we see climate changing today, we don't automatically say it has to be humans. What we do is we first check out the natural suspects. Like what? Well, we know that the sun has caused climate to change in the past, and there's been natural cycles too, volcanic eruptions. Could any of these be responsible for our current warming? Let's look at the sun first. Could it be the sun? Turns out, no, it couldn't. Why? Because the sun's energy has been going down the last 50 years or so. At the same time, the Earth's temperature has been going up. So when you turn a dimmer switch on a lamp down, does that lamp get brighter or dimmer? If it's wired the right way, it gets dimmer, right? We can't be warming if the sun's energy has been going down due to the sun. There has to be a different cause. Could it be natural cycles? This is the most popular argument, but often people don't understand how natural cycles work. They work like a teeter-totter or a seesaw. They move heat around the climate system from north to south, east to west, and from the ocean to the atmosphere and back again. So although natural cycles can cause a certain part of the world to get warmer, they do so at the expense of another part. They can't just create heat out of nothing. That would violate conservation of energy, which is one of the laws that explains how the whole universe works. So we know our current warming is not due to natural cycles because every part of the climate system is warming. The ocean, the land surface, all of the frozen areas of the globe, and the atmosphere. Just to give you an example of what a natural cycle looks like, a popular one is the medieval warm period. People always say, well, don't you know that it was warmer before? I mean, they called Greenland green, didn't they? Well, it wasn't because it was green. It was because they wanted people to move there to get out of the overpopulated areas in Scandinavia. And when they arrived there, then they found out it was covered in a giant ice sheet. But it's true that the medieval warm period was slightly warmer than average, but not over the whole world, just over the North Atlantic. In fact, using paleoclimate data of the type that Jessica and her colleagues study, we can see what global temperature looked like in the medieval warm period. Blue is colder than average, red is warmer than average, and you can see a warm spot over the North Atlantic. But look over in Siberia. Was it the medieval warm period in Siberia? No, in fact, It was the medieval cold period in Siberia. So why are we so obsessed with something that we call a medieval warm period? Because most of our culture comes from Western Europe, specifically the UK, where it was a little bit warmer than average. If you want to see what today looks like, this is what today looks like. It looks nothing like a natural cycle. Could we just be getting warmer since the last ice age, people ask? Because we know that there was a very cold period not that long ago, and then it got warmer since then. No, because it turns out that it was very cold, and then warming peaked about 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, right when our society became agriculturalized and people started to build cities and all that kind of stuff. It peaked around then, and since then, we were gradually, slowly cooling, ready to head into the next ice age until something happened just a couple of hundred years ago. It was not a squirrel looking for an acorn that happened. And then lastly, people say, well, don't you know that one volcanic eruption produces more pollution than people do in, insert a number there. People say a year, 5 years, 30 years, 100 years. Unfortunately, none of that is true. Volcanic eruptions primarily cool the earth. They don't warm it. They produce all kinds of particles that act like an umbrella that reflect the sun's energy back to space. So after a big volcanic eruption, the earth is a little bit cooler for anywhere for a couple of weeks, up to maybe 1 or 2 years for a big eruption, not warmer. And although geologic activity, not so much volcanoes, but geologic activity, like, all the bubbling of gases that you get out of the pools at Yosemite Park and things like that, although geologic activity does produce some heat-trapping gases, it's only a tiny fraction of what humans produce, the amount equal to about 3 medium-sized US states per year. If you want more, our Global Weirding series talks about all of these natural factors in the video called This Is All Just a Natural Cycle, right? But we have gone through and we have systematically eliminated every natural factor. Every single one has an excuse. Not only that, but we know why we're warming. It's no mystery. It's because our planet has a natural blanket of heat-trapping gases that's entirely natural. The sun's energy shines down and goes through this blanket like a window, but then the earth heats up and gives off heat energy. And just like a blanket traps your body heat on a cold night, in the same way, this naturally occurring blanket of heat-trapping gases keeps our planet over 60 degrees Fahrenheit or over 30 degrees Celsius warmer than we would be otherwise. Well, if this is natural, and in fact, this blanket is responsible for the fact that we have life on Earth, then what's the problem? The problem is that by digging up and burning coal and gas and oil, we are wrapping an extra blanket of heat-trapping gases around the planet. And just like you would, if somebody snuck in at night and put an extra blanket on you, you'd wake up sweating. In the same way, our planet is starting to run a fever because of this extra blanket that we've wrapped around it. And we've known this for a really long time. Time for you to vote again. Ready? How long have we known that burning fossil fuels produces heat-trapping gases that are wrapping an extra blanket around the Earth? Did we find out when Al Gore released his movie? Did we find out in 1988, which was a famous date when it was a very hot summer, and climate scientist Jim Hansen testified to Congress for the first time saying global warming was real? Did we find out in the 1950s when scientists were first doing using giant supercomputers to model the planet? Did we find out earlier in the 1900s, or did we find out in the 1850s? All right. I see votes going in here, and I'm going to give you the answer here, which is a very cool answer. And we have a Global Weirding episode on this too, called How Long Have We Known About Climate Change? The answer is indeed the 1850s. We've known about this extra blanket around our planet, we've known about the natural blanket around our planet since the work of Fourier. We've known that we humans are adding an extra blanket to our planet, and this extra blanket would warm our planet since the work of John Tyndall and Eunice Foote in the 1850s. We've known how much the planet would warm since the work of Arrhenius in the 1890s. He calculated the first climate model by hand. It took him 2 years. And Guy Callender in the 1930s rode around the world and collected temperature data from weather stations around the world to show that the planet actually was warming. That is how long we've known about this. Isn't that incredible? But now we get to the question that the most people wanted the answer to, or sorry, the second most people wanted the answer to, and that is, why does it matter? I mean, there's so many issues today that are so urgent and so overwhelming. People who can't even feed their families, people concerned about issues of justice and equality, people concerned about the economy, people concerned about their safety and their health. Why does climate change matter? Can't we just push it off and worry about it later? When we look at what people think about climate change, this is one of our biggest issues. The Yale program on climate communication has these fantastic maps that ask people all kinds of questions. If you want to look it up, you just Google Yale climate opinion maps, and these will come right up. You can get results by congressional district, by county, and by riding in Canada. They have Canadian maps too. And anything that's orange means more than 50% of people say yes, and anything that's blue is less than 50% of people say yes. So when they ask people, is it happening? People say yes. Is it going to affect plants and animals? People say yes. So we're okay in general with it happening and affecting plants and animals. Will it harm future generations? Yes. Will it harm people in the US? Ooh, we start to see a bit more blue here. And then they ask this question, ready? Do you think it will harm you? All of a sudden, it's blue across almost the entire country. So this is the bigger problem we have, not do we think it's happening, do we think it's humans? The bigger problem we have is people don't think it matters. If you're wondering who those yellow counties are, it turns out one of the most concerned people groups about a changing climate is Hispanic Catholics. Now you might say, well, of course, that's because the Pope wrote that encyclical, right? 5 years ago? No, because the least concerned people group in the entire United States is, you might be ready to say white evangelicals, but nope. By 1 percentage point, white Catholics are the least concerned people group, and then white evangelicals after them. So it isn't the Pope's encyclical that's causing this. It's awareness of how it matters to us. It's not about the polar bear. It's not just about people who live far away, although they are absolutely affected by a changing climate. We are being affected right here and right now, and that's why it matters. Climate change doesn't need to be further up our priority list, as if it's at number 18 or 22, we need to push it up to maybe number 3 or number 2. The only reason we care about a changing climate is because it affects everything already on our priority list. Do you worry about people having enough food to eat? Do you worry about people being able to drink clean water that's not contaminated? Do you worry about people having being healthy? Do you worry about having an economy where people can get jobs? Do you worry about people being safe? Do you worry about your kids? Do you worry about your family? Do you worry about the place where you live? Do you worry about the future? Almost anything we're already concerned about is affected by a changing climate. And that's why we care whether we realize it or not, because of everything we already care about. So it isn't a case of moving climate change further up our priority list. It's a case of identifying what's already at the top of our priority list and then connecting the dots so we realize how climate change already affects the things that we already care about. That's why we care. The United Nations has published these Sustainable Development Goals that are so basic. A goal of eliminating poverty, eliminating hunger, ensuring good health and quality education, gender equality, clean water for people. And they have down at number 13 climate action. But to be totally honest, I wouldn't even put this on at the list because you might argue, well, why is it 13? Maybe it should be 15, maybe it should be 5. No. The only reason we care about climate change is because it affects everything already on this list. Climate change is, as the US military calls it, a threat multiplier. It takes the issues we're already worried about and exacerbates them or makes them worse. Like what? Well, for example, Climate change has already increased the economic gap by as much as 25% between the richest and poorest countries in the world. That's not future. It has already happened. What else is happening? Climate change disproportionately affects women and children. Climate change disproportionately affects people who are marginalized and indigenous communities. Climate change, very relevant to our times, disproportionately affects people of color, people who are socioeconomically vulnerable, people whose health is already precarious, people who already live in very polluted areas, as the largest number of Black people in the US do. They live in places that are exposed to air pollution, to water pollution, to soil pollution. Climate change affects all of these issues, and that's why we care about it. I don't just care about racism. I don't just care about gender equality. I don't just care about poverty or hunger. I care about climate change because I care about these things. And as Christians, how much more? So give me a word here, just one word. If you have to use two words, put a dot between them. You'll see why in a minute. So if you have to use two words, make sure you put a dot between your two words. But when it comes to climate change, what are you most worried about climate change making worse? Are you worried that it will affect your health? Are you worried that it will affect poverty? Are you worried that it will affect security? Will it affect our natural places, agriculture, food, water, kids, everything? Yes, absolutely. Breathing, stability, survival, the future, prosperity. See, look at this. Climate change absolutely endangers the polar bears. In fact, a new study just came out recently showing that. But it isn't just about the polar bears, and it isn't just about the future. It's about everything. Who here does not care about their health, no matter where we fall on the political spectrum? The coronavirus pandemic has showed us that in spades. Who doesn't care about having food to eat and water to drink? We can't live without those things. And we need those things to be clean and available to us. No matter who we are, no matter what we care about, we already care about climate change. We just haven't connected the dots. So it isn't a case of making people care about climate change or trying to convince people to care about climate change. No. It's a case of listening to them, having conversations with people, figuring out what already matters to them today, and then connecting the dots to how they already care about climate change. They just didn't realize it. See the difference? So that leads directly into our last question, and get your questions ready because we're going to take a few of them after this too, okay? Our last question is, what can I do about it? So often we feel like we're told to change a light bulb or install a smart thermostat, which I've done, or recycle, which I do. And all of these things do matter and they do make a difference. And we are doing them. This is the encouraging thing. According to the Yale Program in Climate Communication, 32% of us have rewarded companies that we think are doing the right thing. 27% of us have punished companies that we think are doing the wrong thing. Only 4% of us have eliminated animal products or meat from our diet, which is a big way that we can reduce our personal carbon footprint. But 94% of us say that we're willing to eat more fruit and vegetables, which is actually better for our health anyways. But these actions are not enough. They're not enough. Even with all the LED light bulbs that we've replaced, that's only 1.7% of the problem. Even if the entire world went vegan, and in many developing countries, that's not actually possible. Some it is, but not most. Even if the entire world did that, we'd only reduce about 10 to 15% of global emissions. We need system-wide change. And the system-wide change begins with understanding that the biggest problem we have is that we don't think it matters to us, and we don't think there's anything we can do to fix it. And so that's why the single most important thing anybody can do about climate change is this: talk about it. Because it turns out nobody does. Nobody talks about it. And if we don't talk about it, why would we care? And if we don't care, why would we ever act? Why don't we talk about it? because we don't think it matters to us, and we don't think there's anything positive that we can do to fix it. And when climate changes and we get very worried, often our instinct is to share more scary facts with people. Because we say if they're not worried, they should be. So let's tell them how horrible it is and how we're all going to die in 12, no 11, no 10 years if we don't do something about it. That's not true. And the more carbon we produce, the worse it is. But what happens when we share scary data is people reject it even more. Inaction results because, as neuroscientist Tali Shalot says, she says, fear and anxiety cause us to withdraw, to freeze, and to give up rather than taking action. And so climate change is more. This vicious cycle does not work. What does work? What does work is sharing why and how climate change matters in the ways that already matter to us, and what are the positive things that we can do to fix it. So when climate changes and we get worried, break the cycle. Have a positive conversation that, as researcher Matthew Goldberg found, creates a true positive pro-climate feedback loop. Talk about how it matters to us and what we can do to fix it. People feel empowered by that, and action results, breaking the cycle. As neuroscientist Tali Shalot continues, she said, our brain is built to associate forward action with a reward, not with avoiding harm. So we need to reframe our message so the information we provide induces hope, not dread. Hope. Like what? Like talking about why it matters to us, no matter where we fall on the political spectrum, connecting the dots to address psychological distance. We feel like it's far away from us when really it's close to home, and inspiring to address the fact that we don't think there's anything we can do to fix it, because there is. Like what? We can bond over the place where we live, our family, our shared faith, activities we enjoy, things that matter to us. And then once we've connected the dots, we can talk about how there's solutions. Like what? Like airports going carbon neutral, the biggest army base in the US being powered by wind and solar energy. By big companies going carbon neutral and continuing to lead the economy. By churches and faith communities reducing their carbon footprint, saving their energy, increasing their efficiency, putting solar panels in the shape of a cross on their roof. I love that. By coal museums going with clean energy. By airlines powering their flights with clean biofuel. By people, from kids to people in developing countries, revolutionizing their lives with new technology and access to clean energy. By the fact that it's been 6 years, since we've been installing more new clean energy around the world than more new fossil fuels. The tide is starting to turn, and we can share this news with people. Project Drawdown is a fantastic resource for positive, constructive climate solutions. If you're wondering what to talk about, just go to Project Drawdown and read any of their articles on climate solutions, and you will have many new things to share with people. We can talk about how we can act individually. Absolutely. Recycling, eating lower down the food chain, light bulbs, solar panels. But we also have to talk about how we can act in community. And there's a great resource called climatecaretakers.org that actually sends you ideas on how we can act together as a community every month. We have to act wisely, as was discussed in the previous webinar just a few days ago, about being good stewards of our resources, which include not just our money, but this planet we've been given. And by talking about it, we can share the good news that there are things we can do about a changing climate. The most effective thing any one of us can do is to have a conversation about why it matters to us and what we can do to fix it. You are the number one best messenger to do that. You really are, not me, you. Because caring about God's creation, the people and the other living things that are already affected by climate change today, it's who we are. It's what our faith is. It's accepting our responsibility. And the bottom line for me is that it's a true expression of God's love. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you for sharing and watching that. Greg mentioned that at least from his side, there was a disconnect between what he saw and what he heard. I don't know if anybody else did. Others I heard from didn't. But we will send out the link to that so you can watch it on your own. And there's other videos that she referred to. So you can also look at that. Anything else, Greg, you want to add or comment on before we open it up for questions?
I guess I just want to thank you, Pastor Mark. I just wanted to emphasize a few points that that Catherine made. One was about the question, did climate change make it worse? And she referred to the way the U.S. Department of Defense has referred to climate change as a threat multiplier. So there are direct ways that we can be affected by climate and weather, such as the direct effects of a really overbearing heat wave, or the way that increased temperature might reduce snowpack. But there are also the indirect ways, and this is really where the threat multiplier part comes in, where there's another link between the heat and the way it affects some creature like mosquitoes that spread disease, or the way that directly the heat affects the snow, but indirectly the reduced snow reduces the stream flow. And so we feel the effects that way. The other thing that I just wanted to put a fine point on was her, in some of her last remarks, mentioning that we need both. We need individual and community efforts. And in my experience in speaking to congressional staffers, a very small but concentrated amount of traffic on their phones or through letters gets a lot of attention. So whether you feel empowered or not, you probably have more power than you would think, especially since noting the demographics of the folks that have tuned in here. A lot of you are senior citizens, and in some, with some members of Congress, senior citizens voices count more. So just wanted to highlight those points, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so at this point, if you would raise your hand with the emoji under reactions, or if you want to jump up and down, raise your hand so that we can do that, and I'll call on you and unmute yourself if you're muted. I unmuted everyone as far as my side of things go, but if you're muted, you can unmute yourself and ask the question. So anyone have a question you'd like to ask Greg, or other comments? Now's your time. And then we got about 15 minutes, but we can also address them next week. Yeah, Dottie?
Yes, I have a question. When I first came here 25 years ago, our monsoons were pretty big, pretty heavy. And, but I've noticed over the last 15 years, they've become less and less. And this year we had some downpours sporadically around town, but no real monsoonal activity. And yet, when she was speaking about storms and all, how they were increasing in intensity and all, but what happened to our monsoons?
So the short answer to that one is that historically and continuing to now, there's been a lot of variation from year to year and decade to decade in the North American monsoon. And we have to remember that where we live, the monsoon is centered over the highlands in central Mexico. So we're at the fringe. So monsoon won't always reach us. Sometimes it shifts a little to the east or a little to the west. And, your observations about, at least for some of the years, certainly we've seen less monsoon precipitation. This year has been a huge anomaly from what we normally would, the amount of precipitation that we would normally receive. Research shows that, as Catherine mentioned, just simple laws of physics show that as the atmosphere warms, it can hold more moisture. And what we've seen from research at the University of Arizona, my colleague Chris Castro in the Department of Hydrology and Atmospheric Sciences looked at the history of the summer precipitation in Arizona over around the last 50 or 60 years or so. And what he found was that there's been an increase in the intensity of the summer precipitation, not the amount of precipitation. So what Chris found is that we're seeing more precipitation falling during fewer days with more dry spells in between. When Catherine mentioned the increase in intensity and precipitation, she pointed out that the effect in the United States has been the strongest in the Northeast and the Midwest parts of the United States. In our part of the country, the biggest increase in intensity has been during the winter and spring seasons, and that's primarily been as a result of a phenomenon that she referred to called atmospheric rivers. And the sort of the classic atmospheric river that you might hear about on a weather report would be the so-called Pineapple Express, where we get these winter season narrow streams of moisture emanating from the tropics, like in Hawaii, and then usually hitting the California coast, sometimes penetrating further inland to Nevada, Arizona, and Utah. And those have been increasing in intensity, and they're projected to continue increasing in intensity in the future. And my guess is that it's very hard to make summer precipitation become, much, much more intense, because the marginal increase in temperature is small, because in the summertime our temperatures are so hot anyway. But I would invite Glenn, if he has any comments about the summer monsoon in our part of the world.
Glenn, are you still with us? You want to make a comment? I'm not sure. Yeah, he's there. Well, yeah. There's a monsoon storm on his.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure he's.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Okay. Well, maybe we could tap into his knowledge.
I had trouble unmuting, but I guess I'm unmuted now.
Yeah.
I've experienced the same thing in terms of the research that I've looked into. It parallels what you were saying, Mr. Garfin. And yeah, the intensity more and the frequency of storms is less. That seems to be the common denominator. Now, why that's happening, things that have been suggested, not necessarily proven, would be the length of the Rocky Mountain snowpack, for instance. If it stays around a long time, longer than normal, then it would do something to the atmosphere temperature-wise and cause a delay in the monsoon activity. But that's just one example. So I'll turn it back to Greg.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Glenn, any other comment before I go into the question? Jim, go ahead, please.
Yes.
Yes.
As a comment on that, I heard in a talk a few months ago that if you compare our rainfall in our dry period with that in, I think it was the 50s, there was a dry period. We're not really actually getting lower rain, but the temperature's higher, so you get more evaporation. So you end up being drier and the drought itself is worse.
Yeah, that's a good observation. That's true. We have not seen a big decrease in precipitation. Instead, what we're seeing in the Southwest region, and I'll go into this with some colleagues next week in more detail, is essentially an aridification of the region because of the effect of increasing temperatures on evaporation, soil moisture, and especially on snowpack in the Colorado River Basin.
Thank you. Jim Thompson, question and comment.
I wanted to just ask if there's any statistics relating to the total annual rainfall. It was seeming that my observation was that we don't seem to be getting as much rain during the so-called monsoon time, but we seem to be getting more during the winter, springtime, that we got some fairly good rainstorms early on this year that accounted for some of the annual rainfall. Is that changing? Are we getting less total annual rainfall, or is it, actually increasing?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And again, we'll go into this and present evidence and go into it in more detail in next week. But by and large, there's been a small decrease in springtime precipitation. There's actually been a decrease in winter precipitation. This year it didn't follow that particular trend. But the major thing that's happening with our precipitation is that it varies a lot. And we have these periods that are by and large wetter and by and large drier that tend to vary depending upon the long-term behavior of the interaction between the atmosphere and the Pacific Ocean. So we haven't seen a really tremendous decrease in precipitation. But we have, as I'll show next week, seen a substantial increase in temperature, and that has affected, again, snowpack and the threshold at which we might cross into drought because of the increased temperatures.
Okay, could I extend it a little bit farther and make an observation that a number of years ago, when they were doing the research to plan for the Central Arizona project and the allocation of the water resource to the various states in the Southwest, they projected that they would be getting X number of acre feet of available water, and then it is not materialized. Now we're seeing Lake Mead getting to the point where it's getting close to not being able to generate electricity any longer because the water level is too low. Will you discuss some of that?
Yes, I could do that. I could do a little bit of that now, and I'll just say again, precipitation, the signal of precipitation in our region is mostly one of variation. And there really have not been tremendous trends in precipitation. So we tend to see, I'm really loath to use this word, but it's easy to grasp. It's not technically accurate, but we see cycles where we have wetter and drier periods. In the early 1920s, when the 7 Colorado River Basin states negotiated the Colorado River Compact, based on the limited data that they had available, they thought that there was the stream flow in the river was more than it turns out that it actually is. And if we look at these paleohydrology records that go back many hundreds of years, we can easily see that the river was allocated during an a period of anomalous high flow. So that's one of the things that's contributing to the lack of reliability or less reliability in the Colorado River surface water supply. Another thing that has been happening is that, as I've mentioned, temperatures are increasing. That's affecting snowpack so that we're getting literally less water. If you took a measurement of snow, let's say you took a cylinder, you plunged it into the snow in the Colorado Rockies, and you did the same thing back in the 1950s and you did it now, there would be more water if you melted the volume of snow from plunging that cylinder into the snow. There would be more water in it back in the 50s than now. So we're seeing, as a result of increasing temperature, decrease in the water content of snow, and also in our snow-covered area in Western North America. So those are a couple of climate-related factors, one related to variability and the way it affected the allocation of the river. So the river was over-allocated, again, based on the best data that they had at the time. Another is a climate change factor. And then a third thing is that because the river's been over-allocated and we're drawing more water than the river's providing, that's also making the reservoir levels go down at a faster rate than they might otherwise, than they would naturally, let's say. But we can cover that next week.
Yeah, I'll look forward to next week, and maybe I'll have some more questions at that time. But thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Super.
And so our time is almost up in terms of what we allocated for this. So if you have some questions that you would like to ask, you could put them in the chat now. You can also email them to me or on our website. And my email address is simply pastor, P-A-S-T-O-R, at, and the initials of our church and the state, SELCAZ.org. Or you, like I said, you can also look on the website. There's a place you can, and that website is the same address, SELCAZ.org. And we look forward to next week. Wednesday is what we're looking at, and still 6:30 to 8. Is that correct, Greg?
Yes.
Okay. And
is that okay with everyone? If that's a hardship, I could ask the speakers if they could start later.
Is
but
that
they indicated a preference to starting earlier?
Okay. Yeah, we're trying to honor their time factors too. Yes, in terms of some of the publicity, it was stated a different day and time, but things, you know, as we gathered these folks together who are going to do a great job next week, we wanted to honor what they could do. So it's next Wednesday, the 23rd, 6:30 to 8. And we're going to focus then, move from the global picture that Dr. Hayhoe provided to a more local feature, which is what we kind of started to get into right now anyway, about the San Pedro Valley and this area region. And we'll be joined, Dr. Griffin will be joined by, Garfin. We'll be joined by Mike Crimmins, UA's Associate Specialist in Climate Science, and U of A Fire Ecologist Lori Marshall, and Holly Richter from the Nature Conservancy, which is near to us, being so close to Ramsey Canyon. So we look forward to their contributions next week. And you do need to register separately. So even though you registered for this Zoom conversation, I will send everybody, I should have everybody's emails. If you didn't, if somehow you registered late, you should already have the email, I'm understanding. I mean, we should already have your email. We'll send you the registration information for that Zoom for each week. And also you can go to the website, selcaz.org, and you can register there as well. For our church folks, it'll be in the bulletin and the messenger as well. So, and if you have any questions about accessing that way, don't hesitate to let me know about that as well. So before we go, just want to see if there's anybody who's just chomping at the bit that wants to have a final question or comment. We may not be able to address it all, but we can at least note it and try to get to it next time. Gail, you're waving your hand.
Yes, I just wanted to ask Dr. Garfin, with all the trees that have been burning around the world, in Australia, the Amazon, and now big fires that we have on the West Coast, that's got to have a tremendous impact on how much where those trees are no longer there, and how much they have cleaned the air in the past. So I'm thinking about planting trees. I know there are some organizations like 1 billion trees or 8 billion trees, something like that. Is that something that the whole world can get into? It's not political. And is that going to make a difference? Is that going to be something we could strive for and work on?
Thank you for that, for those observations and that comment. So there's probably a lot of nuance to using planting trees as a climate change solution. On the one hand, yes, trees absorb carbon and they sequester that carbon over their lifetime. On the other hand, depending upon where you plant the trees and what kinds of trees you plant and what other kind of activity you might be displacing, it may not be a good solution. So, for example, in a water scarce region, tree planting may not be, since trees, require so much water to grow, that may not be the best solution all the time. So some careful thought needs to go into that. The other thing, and I've heard some various evidence on about tree planting as a large-scale global solution, but it also depends on whether we're taking other actions to reduce the emission of heat-trapping gases through the burning of fossil fuels. If we continue to burn fossil fuels at a very rapid rate, even with tree planting, we probably wouldn't be able to keep pace. And the very simple measure that I heard from a Norwegian scientist who specializes in the carbon cycle, he said that if we were to burn all of the fossil fuel reserves on Earth, the amount of carbon that would go in the atmosphere would be an order of magnitude, so 10 times, at least 10 times greater than the amount that we could possibly absorb by doing massive tree planting. But that's only if we burn it all, we burn it fast.
Right. Thank you so much. Well, again, I want to honor our time. Thank you for that, Greg, and honor your evening. It's past the time, but thank you all so much for coming here and being a part of this, whether it's on Zoom or live stream or watch now or later. And I do invite you to let folks know and invite them along to be a part of this for the next 2 weeks, and invite them to watch this if they haven't yet. Again, it'll be on our website for up to 90 days and to watch this. So thank you again, Greg, so much for helping us to put this together. And we wish you all well and blessings on our restful and renewing evening. And we hope to see you next week. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Good night, little Glowacki.
Hey, thank you so much.
And Greg put out the Catherine's presentation where that can be found on YouTube. It's on the chat. And I'll send it to you too.